My husband's trauma made him sit in the car for 10 minutes while our son screamed in pain. Now I'm filing for divorce, and his family says I'm heartless for leaving him. I, F, have been married to my husband, M, for 2 years. He has a habit of sitting in the car 5 to 10 minutes before entering the house. I don't know why he does it, but he talked about a past traumatic experience he had when he came home and caught his ex cheating on him. Because of that, he'd just spend a few minutes in his car before he enters his home as a response to his trauma. Now, I won't say that he's wrong in coping with what happened, but this has made me feel uneasy and it has caused many fights between us. Like when we have guests, he'd sit outside before coming in, or when dinner is waiting on him, and he'd take 10 minutes silently sitting in the car. I was worried that something might come up and he would not respond properly. And it happened last week. My 8-year-old son tripped and fell down the stairs and broke his ankle. He was in so much pain, and I called my husband to come take him to the hospital. He rushed out of work, but then I called, and I was stunned when I looked out the window and saw him sitting outside the house in his car. I was both shocked and angry. I ran outside and asked how long he was sitting in the car. He told me around 8 minutes. I asked why he didn't come into the house immediately to help, and he said he would after 2 more minutes. I was so mad and hurt, but I tried to rush him, and he insisted he wouldn't feel comfortable coming in until the 10 minutes were up. He told me to get my son ready to take him to the hospital, but I started screaming at him nonstop, telling him this was a family emergency and that he was out of his mind to behave like that. It might not have been my best response, but I was shocked by his behavior and quite concerned because I had the situation always stuck in the back of my mind, thinking, what would my husband do when there's a family emergency? I ended up taking my son by myself when my neighbor intervened and offered to take us. We went to the hospital, and later my husband came and tried to talk to me, but I refused. I then went to stay with my mom and texted him that I wanted a divorce. He tried to rationalize and justify what he'd done, saying he could not help it, and that he was nervous and wanted to help my son, but felt stuck. I refused to reply to his messages, and days later, his family literally harassed me, saying I was making my husband's trauma more severe and that I disrespected his boundaries by pushing him off his limits. I feel lost and unable to think because of the whole ordeal. My family is with me on this, but they can be biased sometimes. My husband is still trying to talk me out of divorce, saying I'm making a huge deal out of it. I feel like I no longer have trust in him, especially when it comes to serious stuff like how cold he acted in a family emergency. Update 1. I didn't expect my original post to blow up like it did. Thank you all for your comments, messages, and support. I've read through most of them, and honestly, it's been a lot to take in. I wanted to give you all an update on what's been happening since my last post. After the initial shock and anger, I decided to have a sit-down conversation with my husband. I felt like it was important to hear him out, even though I was still very hurt and confused by what had happened. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground, and I laid it all out. How I felt during the emergency, how his behavior had affected me, and how I've been questioning our entire relationship since that day. He was clearly upset and kept apologizing, but he maintained that his need to sit in the car was something he couldn't just turn off, even in an emergency. He said it's like his brain locks up and he can't move until he feels ready. He tried to explain that it's not something he does to hurt me or our family, but it's his way of dealing with overwhelming emotions, particularly because of his past trauma. He kept saying that he's been working on it in therapy. But that day, it all just became too much for him. I asked him if he could have handled things differently, especially in a situation involving our child. He admitted that he should have found a way to push through it, but he didn't know how at the time. He said he'd do anything to make it up to me and wanted us to go to couples counseling to work through this together. But here's the thing. I'm struggling to reconcile his explanation with what I experienced that day. I told him that while I understand he's been through something traumatic, I need to be able to trust that my partner will be there when it matters most, especially for our son. I asked him if he thought he could ever break out of this habit, or if this would be a permanent fixture in our lives. His answer was hesitant. He said he was hopeful that therapy would help, but he couldn't make any promises. That was the point where I realized that this might not be something that could be fixed overnight, or ever. It broke my heart to think about it, but I told him that I wasn't sure if I could stay in a marriage where I'd constantly be worried about whether my husband would freeze up when our family needed him the most. After that conversation, I decided to stay with my mom a bit longer. My husband has been texting me every day, apologizing and asking for another chance. He even sent me screenshots of appointments he's booked with his therapist and some couples counselors. But I'm still so conflicted. My mind keeps going back to that moment when my son was in pain, and my husband was just sitting there, unable to move. My son is doing better now, by the way. He's got a cast on, and we've been spoiling him with his favorite snacks and movies. I haven't told him much about what's going on between me and his stepdad. I'm trying to keep things as normal as possible for him, but he's definitely noticed that we're not at home, and that something's off. He's asked a few questions, and I've tried to be honest without giving away too much. It's so hard because I don't want him to think that any of this is his fault. I'm at a crossroads here, Reddit. Part of me wants to give my husband another chance because I know he's not a bad person, and I believe that he loves us. But another part of me is scared. scared that this will happen again. And maybe next time it will be something even more serious. I don't know if I can live with that kind of fear hanging over me. I haven't made any decisions yet, but I'm leaning towards filing for divorce. I feel like I need to protect myself and my son, but it's tearing me apart to think about ending my marriage. I never expected things to turn out like this. Thank you again for all your support. I'll update again if anything changes. Update 2. I wanted to give another update since a lot has happened since my last post. First off, thank you to everyone who sent kind words and advice. It's been a really tough time, and your support means a lot to me. After spending more time with my mom and thinking about everything, I finally made the decision to file for divorce. It wasn't an easy choice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this situation wasn't going to change in a way that would make me feel safe in the long run. My husband's behavior during the emergency with my son showed me that I couldn't rely on him in critical moments, and that's just not something I can live with. I sat down with my husband to let him know my decision. It was probably one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. He was devastated, and he kept pleading with me to reconsider, but I had to stand firm. I told him that I believed he needed to focus on his own healing and that maybe in the future, when he's in a better place mentally, he can be in a relationship that works for him. But right now, I have to prioritize my son and myself. He didn't take it well. He said that I was abandoning him when he needed me the most, that I was punishing him for something he couldn't control. And maybe part of that is true. But I just couldn't get over what happened that day with my son. I couldn't see a future where I wasn't constantly worried about whether my husband would be able to step up when it mattered most. After our talk, things got a bit messy. My husband started calling and texting me constantly, sometimes angry, sometimes begging. His family also got involved again, and this time they were even more aggressive. They accused me of being heartless and of not understanding the depth of his trauma. I get that they're protective of him, but their reaction just made me feel more isolated and sure of my decision. I ended up blocking most of his family members after one of them showed up at my mom's house unannounced. It was scary and overwhelming, and it just reinforced that I needed to create some distance. I've been focusing on getting the legal process started and finding a new place for my son and me. My husband has agreed to let me keep the house for now, but we'll be selling it once the divorce is finalized. As for my son, I've been trying to keep his routine as normal as possible. He's still healing from his injury, but he's in good spirits. I haven't explained the full situation to him yet, but I'm planning to have that conversation soon. I want to make sure he knows that he's loved and that none of this is his fault. It's going to be tough, but I'll do whatever it takes to make this transition as smooth as possible for him. I've also started going to therapy myself. I realized that I need help processing everything that's happened and figuring out how to move forward. It's been helpful to talk to someone who's neutral and can give me perspective on everything. I've also reached out to a couples counselor to see if my husband and I can have a few sessions to help with the transition, especially since we'll still need to communicate about my son and the divorce. Right now, I'm just taking things one day at a time. It's hard to believe that my marriage is ending, but I'm trying to focus on the future and what's best for my son and me. I know it's going to be a long road, but I'm hopeful that we'll come out of this stronger. Thank you again to everyone who has supported me through this. I'll update if there are any major changes, but for now, I'm just trying to keep moving forward. Final update. It's been a while since my last update, and I wanted to come back to let you know how things have turned out. It's been a roller coaster, but I'm finally in a place where I feel more at peace with everything that's happened. First, the divorce was finalized a few weeks ago. The process was smoother than I expected, mostly because my husband eventually came around and agreed to an amicable split. After a lot of back and forth, he realized that this was what I truly needed, and that fighting it would only make things harder for both of us. We were able to reach a fair agreement on the division of assets, and he's even agreed to cover some of my son's medical expenses until his ankle fully heals. The day we signed the papers was bittersweet. Part of me was relieved that it was finally over, but another part of me was grieving the end of what I thought would be a lifelong partnership. My husband and I had a final conversation after the papers were signed, and it was surprisingly civil. We both acknowledged that we still care for each other, but that our marriage wasn't meant to be. He told me that he's going to continue therapy and work on his issues, and I genuinely hope he finds the healing he needs. After the divorce, I moved back into our house with my son. We've been settling back in, and I've been making some changes to the space to make it feel like a fresh start for us. My son is adjusting well, and his ankle is healing nicely. He's back to being his cheerful self, and we've even started planning a small vacation once he's fully recovered. Just the two of us. I think we both need some time away to reset and focus on our future together. I've also been continuing with therapy, and it's been incredibly helpful. I've realized that I was carrying a lot of guilt and fear about the divorce, but my therapist has helped me see that I made the right decision for my son and myself. I'm learning to trust my instincts again and to let go of the what-ifs that have been haunting me since this all began. As for my ex-husband, we've been maintaining minimal but cordial contact. He's been respectful of my boundaries, and we're working on co-parenting in a way that's best for my son. I know it's going to be a long process, but I'm hopeful that we can eventually reach a place where we're both happy and healthy, even if we're not together. There's one last thing I wanted to share. After everything that's happened, I've started to feel a sense of empowerment that I didn't expect. I've always seen myself as someone who puts others first, often to my own detriment. But going through this divorce has shown me that it's okay to stand up for myself and make decisions that are in my best interest, even if they're difficult. I'm learning to be kinder to myself and to prioritize my own well being, and that feels like a huge step forward. So, that's where things stand now. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm feeling optimistic for the first time in a long time. I've got a lot of healing to do, but I know I'm on the right path. Thank you, Reddit, for all your support and kindness throughout this journey. It's meant more to me than you'll ever know. Wishing you all the best.